Hi, my name is Angel and today I'll be showing you how I painted these shoes. But before we get into the video, I'm just going to go over the paints that I used. I also talk about it in the video, but I just wanted to go over it more detailed. So for these shoes, I used fabric paints, acrylic paints, and then a leather safe top coat. But normally I would just use fabric paint. So here's some shoes that I did that are more detailed. And for these, I just used fabric paint for them. And I use fabric paint because it is cheaper than leather paint, and unlike acrylic paint, it doesn't just like smudge off. So what I mean by that is, for my fabric paint, for all these details right here, so let's say I mess up, I would easily be able just to wipe it away without wiping off the bottom layer of paint. Meanwhile, when you're using acrylic paint, it tends to wipe off like the whole thing. So if I messed up just this eye and I wanted to fix that and I go to wipe it off, instead I'm going to be wiping off all of this color. So that's why I like to use fabric paint instead of acrylic paint, but you can also use acrylic paint. It's just going to be a little bit harder. But both of them are way cheaper than leather paint, so that's why I use them. But to keep it safe and keep it from just wiping off, because it is just fabric paint, I use a leather safe clear top coat. This is the one that I normally use. It's the matte acrylic finisher by Angelus, and it is for leather specifically. And the fabric paints I usually use are from a brand called Colorful from Amazon. And I will also link them in the description box down below. And both of those cost me like $10 on Amazon. But yeah, so again, I suggest using fabric paint. It's just easier to paint with. I also suggest buying really detailed pointed paintbrushes, and then a need is a clear top coat that's leather safe, and you're probably going to want to do a couple layers of that top coat, and that's really the key to having like long-lasting custom shoes, is that clear leather top coat. But yeah, with all that being said, let's get into the actual painting of the shoes. So first, I started off by washing these old Air Force Ones that I had. I washed them in a bucket full of hot water, a little bit of dish soap, and bleach, and some baking soda, and I used a toothbrush to help me scrub all the dirt out. After washing them, the soles were still kind of yellow, so I just went over them with some white acrylic paint. Now, if you're using acrylic paint like I am right here, you're going to need to get a clear finish to go on top of it, because if you just leave the acrylic paint by itself, it will eventually rub off. So later I'm going to show you the clear finisher I use. I use the Angelus acrylic finisher for leather, and I'm going to use that on the whole shoe at the very end. And here's what the shoe looks like after painting it white compared to the shoe that's not painted yet. I also went ahead and painted all the edges of the seams white too, because as you can see, they kind of look black. So after I have my base of white, I start painting on my colors. And I'm going to be using a combination of acrylic paints and fabric paints. Right here I'm using a cheap pink fabric paint, and it is not working for me. It was too liquidy and see-through. I had to do a lot of mixing it with other colors and acrylic paints and fabric paints. And really I just ended up doing a bunch of layers to get the color I wanted. So please do not be like me. I would suggest using fabric paints, but use better ones. These were just like cheap Walmart fabric paints. The ones I normally use are from a brand called Colorful on Amazon. They're really good and they're a thicker consistency, so you'd want a fabric paint with a thicker consistency when painting shoes. It just sticks better. Now again though, if you're gonna use fabric paint, you do have to put the clear leather sealant on top or else it's going to just rub off. Same thing with acrylic paints. Now acrylic paints you can also use, it's just they tend to kind of scratch off more, and when you put the clear finish on top it might smudge a bit, so you might have to go back and forth with your paints and your acrylic finisher. There's mine right there if you want to see it. I use the matte acrylic finisher for leather. So after all the pink was finally done, I took my tablet, pulled up the images I wanted, and then used some clear paper, just taped it down and then traced over the image. And then I flipped my image around and then scribbled my pencil all around it so that I have some basically ink to transfer onto. If you have charcoal, that would work even better for this part. Then I figured out where I wanted my placement to be and then taped it down. Then after taping it scribble side down, I go back over it and trace all of my lines. And that's going to transfer that pigment onto the shoe, so then I have an outline to paint on top of. And there's my outline. And then I'm just going to go in and paint in my colors. And another tip, if you're going to use this kind of transfer method with the pencil like I did, as you can see there's a lot of like little pencil marks and smudges around. I go back later and clean that up with just a Clorox wipe, but because I used acrylic paint for my black outline, it smudged and I had to keep going back and forth repainting my the parts where I used acrylic paint. If you use just fabric paint instead though, it won't smudge when you're cleaning up around it. And finally, when I was done painting and cleaning up all my smudges and mistakes, I went on top of everything with my clear top coat. Here it is again. It's the Angelus matte acrylic finisher, and it is fur leather specifically. Also, the brand Angelus has a bunch of leather paints in multiple colors. You can also just buy the leather paint directly from them, and you won't have to deal with all of this extraness with the acrylic paint and the fabric paint. But it is very expensive. That's why I would suggest just buying the top coat so you don't have to spend all that money on all the paints, and it works just as great. I would just suggest doing a couple of layers of the top coat. I usually do, depending on the piece, between like 3 to like 7 layers, depending on how detailed the piece is. Another tip for right here, I still had some smudges, so I just put the top coat around the whole bunny and then let that dry down and then went back and cleaned up around it. That way I wouldn't smudge my black lines because it already had the top coat on top. Right, here's what the shoes look like after I was done putting my top coat on top. I put about 4 layers and I put the top coat on the entire shoe. So the last thing I did for these shoes was try to patch up these holes. I'm not sure how these shoes got these holes, but to patch them up, I decided to use embroidery thread since it's thicker. And I just tried to make the holes as small as I possibly could by doing a kind of invisible stitch. For the invisible stitch, I just went in and out of the fabric on either side, switching between the left and right side until I could just pull it completely closed, kind of like if you were sewing up a wound. After sewing it to get rid of the loose ends from snipping the embroidery thread, I just burned it and then kind of stamped it down with my lighter. But it kind of made these burn marks, so I decided just to paint over it. So at first I did like a bright white, but it was too bright. So I decided to mix it with a little bit of black and make it more of like a muted cream white to match the rest of the shoe. Here's how the shoes turned out. I ended up using ribbons as the laces because I thought it really added a little nice cutesy touch. But yeah, thank you for watching. I'm gonna leave my Etsy in the description box below if you'd like to check it out. I make lots of different things and I also do custom orders for painted shoes like these.